Welcome back to episode 11 of Supreme Myths. I have a very special guest today. Someone I first met in 1971. Haven't talked to since, but we'll get back to that at the end of the podcast. Nina Sadowsky she went to college at Connecticut College. She graduated from Cardozo Law. She currently, I think, describes herself as an entertainment lawyer in recovery. So we're going to talk about that. She's a Hollywood producer who has helped produce all kinds of movies you've heard of, like The Wedding Planner and Lost Souls and The House of Sand and Fog. I think you worked on Northern Lights, one of my favorite television shows of all time. I didn't know you had worked on that. Now Nina is an author. She's written 4 books for Ballantine Books. Her last one, Convince Me. Everybody should read that. Nina, it's really great to see you again.
Really great to see you too.
And welcome.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We're going to talk about you being a lawyer in recovery in a minute. But before we do that, I'm interested in that. Someday I want to be a law professor in recovery. Maybe sooner rather than later, but we'll see. So I usually ask my guests to give me 3 myths, hence Supreme Myths, about something they're experts in. And I think at this point you are certainly an expert in the business of Hollywood, the business of making movies. Can you give us 3 myths about anything involving Hollywood movies, producing, all that stuff?
Okay, sure. Well, one, I don't know if it's a myth, but I think it certainly would dispel a confusion, is that nobody knows what a producer actually does.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, no one really does. And that's in part because a producer can be many different things, and it also depends what medium you're in. You know, and one small example is that in feature films, you have to have the full producer credit, that's it, the simple credit, in order to collect the Oscar. And you can only have 3 producers. In TV, the executive producer credit is actually the more valuable credit. And executive producers are usually the writer-producers, and in television, the writer is the primary voice, whereas that's not the case in film. So what a producer does, and which I think most people think is, sit around and smoke cigars and yell at people. I think that's one sort of stereotypical. But I don't like cigars, and I always believed in love leadership when I was producing movies. So.
Okay, so one myth is we don't know what producers do.
We don't know what producers do. Number 2 would probably be that the business is glamorous, which it is not at all. Making content means, 12 to 18-hour days. It means more disappointment and rejection, times 100 for everything you actually see get made. So I think people have an allure about it. I think there's an allure to it that's really not the case. It's a business for the tough. Only the strong survive. And a third myth, I'd say, that's interesting. I think a third myth is that Hollywood is a liberal bastion of elitism, and I think that's not actually the case at all. I think it's a very messy place that is figuring out its own comeuppances with race and misogyny, and just sort of the culture we're in as much as any place else. And that people are revealing themselves, not always pleasantly, and even the people who are moving forward with the best of intentions are struggling.
So that third one, Nina, and those are all, I'm going to return to the producer one, but that third one is really interesting, and I guess will bring us to a more serious mode than I was going to get early on, but I am really interested in that. So certainly I assume, and maybe I'm just dead wrong about this, most of the power structure in Hollywood, I assume, votes Democratic and supports Democratic candidates.
I would say most, yes, but I would also say that there are very wealthy people who are in the power structure in Hollywood who are have one view, which is the protect the wealth view. And so and I know some of these people. I'm not going to out anyone because that would be impolitic.
Oh, you
and,
sure? That would make my podcast. My little teeny podcast would get so big.
I haven't stayed alive in Hollywood, this long without picking up some street smarts. So, but people that have really surprised me, and sometimes it's the narrow-minded one-issue Israel question. Sometimes it's the narrow-minded one-issue wealth question, and protecting what they've got. And I think that. I don't understand any one-issue voter from any part of the spectrum. I just think that's, very reductive. So,
right.
People certainly are that. And as I said before, even those of us who are doing the best we can and consider ourselves, progressive and open-minded and inclusive, I think we're all wrestling. And, we live in cancel culture, which makes it very difficult. I think it's very hard. I'm actually working on a new book now, and I decided to make one of the main characters a Black man. And, I have enlisted members of my community, both men and women that are Black, to talk to, who are going to be my beta readers and who have allowed me to interview them. And I was inspired to do this for a couple of reasons. One, because all my work covers social justice. It's all embedded in,
sure. I've noticed.
Behind a slick thriller, but, like the new one, Convince Me, is about pathological lying and how it's creating division and destruction in our society, right? But it's wrapped up as a psychological thriller, right?
Right.
Anyway, I digress, which I often tend to do.
Well, no, that's so. Want to stick on this topic just 2 minutes more, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
I thought I heard you say, and I guess I am a bleeding heart progressive, all the way down,
right,
with very strange views about the Supreme Court for progressive. But leaving that aside, right, I was kind of hoping. I after Harvey Weinstein and everything, I had no doubt that sexual harassment was a huge issue everywhere in America, and Hollywood wouldn't be an exception to that. If anything, it might be worse given the focus on the bodies that Hollywood seems to have. Mm-hmm. But what does surprise me in what you said, leaving aside sexual harassment, is does Hollywood have the same amount of a kind of racism and issues with people of color that are so prevalent in our culture outside of Hollywood?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting because I've really gotten to witness it a little bit up close. Almost 3 years ago, I guess, I partnered with a manager who is the first time I've really felt I've had a rep who was a partner in my career, right? I've had a lot of different representation managers, agents, but I really felt something very different about this relationship. And he's a Black man. And I have seen firsthand how it changes the dynamic.
Wow.
And there was a time recently when we were on the phone about a project, and it was not a Zoom call for an unusual thing for these times. So no one was visible. And there was a white person on the phone who began talking about, whether we should shift something, whether I would consider shifting something I had written to make the characters African American, or actually, as I've learned to say, Black. African American is the wrong thing to say. And it was completely antithetical to what the story is, right? It's not a Black. It would have been the worst kind of, I think, overcompensation, right? To squeeze a family that did not belong in the environment that we had created. And I'm dealing with race in other ways in this environment, but this was a bad suggestion. And so he spoke up, my manager, and identified himself as a Black person and said why this would be, just ridiculous. And, the other person on the phone, kind of withered and died, because, and it wasn't that they did anything racist, right? They were responding to a marketplace that in a very reactive way now has made, Black stories and Black writers insanely popular because everyone is trying to overcompensate to show that, they are not racist. And look, I'll take it, But that's very different from adjusting systemic racism and really making efforts to be an anti-racist society, right? That it's just a different ball. We're at a different marker.
On that last point, and this does get a little bit into what I write about and think about, because I write and think about race a lot. And I just recently wrote a piece on institutional racism. That's one piece, and a separate one on how Trump's racism is America's racism. I'm curious, so if someone, I don't know how this works, so the language I'm going to use is probably totally silly, but if someone had a script, a really powerful, taught script about America today, not 10 years a slave, not segregation in the 60s, but America today, that was dramatically wonderful. A good story. I mean, we all know it has to have a good story. It has it has a good story, but it shows institutional racism today starkly for what it is.
Yeah.
Could that movie get made in Hollywood, even if it had the best story possible?
Well, I don't know about a movie. I think it could get made for television or streaming. And I think it's sort of important to acknowledge how the change in technology and how we both make and consume media is affecting how stories are being told, right? The movie business, and who knows what it's going to be post-pandemic, right? But that was the business of swing for the fences. It has in my opinion, devolved to the business. So swing for the fences movies that are going to satisfy everything, what they call a 4-quadrant movie, which means men, women, all ages, right? And so that's what it is. That's why we have superhero movies and, science fiction. That's what the movie business is. Within the world of network television, cable, premium cable, and streaming, however, there's a lot more room for niche programming, right? And for stories that can be told that don't have to hit everybody, right? And if you just examine, what you can get through your television or through your computer these days, you really see that. You can find almost anything for any person. So it reduces the number of eyeballs you need to have. So therefore, and the risks. And so again, the other thing would be, what's the price point, right? You can't just be talking about, as a story, is it a good story? That should always be number one. But no decision in Hollywood is made without also looking at who is the market? Is this the right price point? Meaning, can we make this movie for a number, or this show for a number that we will be able to recoup on, right?
Right.
What else is on our slate? What else do we have? Do we need something that's contemporary about race? Or did we last season buy 4 shows about race that we can't get off the ground and don't, are mired in development? Who made the phone call? Who's pitching it to them matters. Is it someone who was delivered from them before? Or is it a great script by someone they've never heard of that they would be reluctant to take a risk on, right? So the question of, right? I mean, I teach this when I teach film students, because if you don't understand, I started naive, wide-eyed, believing that if I had great material, it would find a home. And I learned, and it just made me smarter. Unless you know what the obstacles are ahead of you, you don't know how to get around them, right?
Yeah.
So I know how to, I know how to look at the situation and say, yeah, well, I'll take a shot, but there are 90 things there that I'm not seeing that are impacting whether the story gets sold.
It's so, for someone who loves movies, and I do, I really love them. It is so hard for me to think of it as a business in that way. I know it is, but I don't want to think about it that way. And I think about, and I'm sure I know nothing about this, but I think about Quentin Tarantino and his first big movie, Pulp Fiction. Which I just happen to love, whether we don't get into that, but I think it's a fantastic movie. Yeah. Could someone like him get that movie made today?
Well, I mean, there's always room for visionaries to break through. And one of the things that's happened is that the film business has really become democratized by technology. I mean, you can shoot an entire film on your phone. You can edit it.
My kids do it all the time.
Right. I mean, and I would say, I think it's sort of wonderful that anyone could make a movie, but does that mean everybody should be making movies? No. I mean, I think a lot of this just should have been my other myth about Hollywood. Everyone thinks, I could do that.
Right.
Everyone thinks.
Right.
Everyone, how hard could it be to write a script? How hard could it be, it's hard work. It's hard. I think in the pursuit of creating any art, and I feel this way, excuse me, about my novels too. The real skill is making it look so seamless in the consumption that the viewer or the reader has no idea of all the scaffolding that you as the artist put behind to create it. So that's really where the hard work is.
You have some really excellent videos up on your website, or I think it's your website or someplace, about how to write, and one of them was Math for Writers, which scared me, but I watched it anyway. And what is writing, and I think that good legal writing isn't that much different, especially these days with blogs and other forums. Up until tenure, we have to write law review articles in the traditional form. But once that is over, I think a good law review article or a good legal essay, you don't see the scaffolding. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And if you see the scaffolding, the writer isn't doing his or her job, which is not to say we shouldn't be transparent. I think that's a different thing. But I think transparent.
No, I agree. And I actually recently spoke at a writers group of all lawyers.
Yes.
It was really interesting because they're working on everything from memoir to a collection of jokes to novels to legal treatises. Everyone was writing something else, but a lot of the things that I was able to talk to them about in terms of writing skills resonated no matter what they were doing. It just works. So I agree with you. Good writing has a lot of the same.
So I've dabbled in some creative writing, not like you or anything, but I've dabbled in it. And what I tell my students about legal writing, I think is true for creative writing, or non-legal writing, but I'm curious what you think. I tell them, first and foremost, there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I don't mean to the story. I mean to every paragraph. Every paragraph and or every block of dialogue needs to have a reason why it's there, with the and then say exactly what you mean in as few words as possible. That's my favorite one. What do you think of those two for creative writing?
Well, I think that economy of language is always good, but I think you have more luxury in creative writing in that sometimes you can deviate from the point or advancing the plot to illuminate something about character or to create a sense of place, right? I still think you should use economy of language and be careful about what you give, but you're painting a picture. And in fact, one of the things that I do before every scene, I think if I was producing this, what would I need? Like, what would the lighting look like? What would I be talking to the cinematographer about? What would the production design team have brought in? Did we need someone from the greens department because we wanted plants, right? So I really think about that, and it helps me imagine, in a very few kind of economical use of words, the space that we're in. So yes, I think you have a little more luxury, as I said. And the other one was, your first one was?
Really not every sentence or anything.
Beginning, middle, and end. Yeah. Yes, I actually do agree with that. And but I want to expand on it.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to say is that, I believe all structure is a 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end, even though in TV, most movies are. TV, there's also 5, 7, or 8-act structures, which is really just to fit around commercial breaks or other things. But really every story has to have beginning, middle, and end. And there's actually a fantastic theory about why humans react to that. Is that in a 3-act structure, for film, if you figure 120 pages, which is just for the sake of easy math. Yeah. So the first act is 30 pages, the second act is 60, and the last act is 30. And the reason that we as humans identify that is the first act mirrors our youth, the second longer act with its complications, reversals, etc., is our middle age, and then we have a denouement, which is reflects our old age and our death. And also because of that instinctively humans reacted to that as a storytelling structure. And then of course it's been reinforced over years because most a recent film that was not in 3-act structure was La La Land, had 5 acts, right? Right. But we feel a little jarred by that. It's unconscious, but, people sometimes feel a little jarred by breaks in structure. And it's on a very deep level because it's so acculturated.
My wife and I were watching La La Land 2 nights ago, I think it was. And we saw it in the theater when it came out. And I watched it on cable a lot. And I want to really hate it, and I really love it, and I can't figure that out. Like, I want to hate that. There's something about that movie I want to hate, but I love to watch
it.
What made it work?
I think that opening scene, the opening dance number on the freeway is, I thought it set such a high bar for the movie and then didn't really stay at that bar. That was my feeling. Like, I loved a lot of things about it, but I wished it had something that was a punch at the end that was as strong as that open.
Yeah, we were.
But, it's easy to be a critic.
I thought it was interesting that a movie about Hollywood didn't have a Hollywood ending, and I was trying to figure that out. But
I think maybe that was the point, right?
Yeah, I assume it was. So going back to, let me ask you this question next. I do want to get back to producing, but before I do, so this is your language, entertainment lawyer in recovery. That's what you wrote. What does that mean? Right. Talk to me.
Okay, so this is my sorry truth. This is not a pretty story about me, but I'm willing to share it. So, I'm a minor in writing, and I really considered myself an artist my whole life, and my parents supported that. So I graduated from college, and I couldn't afford to move out of my parents' house, and I was working a job as a baby editor at a magazine. And my father said, if you go to law school, I will pay for an apartment. And I was shallow enough to take that deal. And so my then boyfriend was studying for the LSAT. So I thought, oh, okay, we'll do it together. And that's why I went to law school. So, I arrived there and, with all these cutthroat kids who were ripping pages out of books in the library. And, I was sitting in a wide second position on the floor, stretching out my hips and, eating apple chips and going, who are these crazy people? Like, I just didn't really belong. But once I got into it, I am competitive, not with other people, but with myself. And so, I ended up, graduating in the top 10% and being articles editor of the Arts and Entertainment Law Review and having an article published. And, but then I got lucky for someone who was sort of mixed right brain, left brain as I am, is that my first job out of law school was for the Schubert organization. And it was sort of a legal job, but it was also a creative job. And from there, I've done a lot of weird things in my life. I've not had a, easy, well, not easy or straight path. But so I was an executive at Kaufman Astoria Studios in New York when that place was getting off the ground. And I made independent movies out of my apartment in Greenwich Village and got them into Sundance and ultimately, moved to LA. And I did some legal work on the side when I was getting started, mostly in intellectual property, mostly represented writers, while I was trying to get my, movie career off the ground. And, I switched to writing, frankly, because I got divorced and my kids were little and producing meant I was gone all the time.
Right.
And I only had them half the week. And I just bet on myself. And that worked out really well until the 2008 writer's strike, where I had, was no longer a producer and executive. I wasn't on any of those lists anymore. And there was no writing to be had really. The strike didn't last a year, but the anticipation of the strike and the aftermath lasted, probably a year and a half, which is when I started teaching. It's been a long, strange trip.
And you don't practice law anymore, I take it?
I don't. It comes in handy, and I'm an annoying client because I actually read my contracts and I ask specific questions.
Do you miss it at all?
No, not a whit. I mean, I have a really interesting life right now. I run NYU Los Angeles, which is a program for advanced students studying media, entertainment, and tech, which we launched last year. And of course, within my first year, I've had to pivot to the pandemic. So that keeps me busy.
Yeah.
And I really found, even though I describe myself as a lawyer in recovery and an accidental academic, because I began teaching
Yeah.
out of the last strike, I really have come to love that. I love my work in education, and I was at USC for over 10 years, and
Yeah.
I've been building this program, and I love that part of my life. And then I have several shows in development for television, one based on my Burial Society series, which is she's my badass avatar. She's a woman who runs a private witness protection program and saves whistleblowers. And
You had a badass side when you were
women.
13, but we'll get back to that later. Go ahead.
I'm still a badass. I'm proud of that. But I feel like I march and I sign petitions and I donate money to causes I believe in. And Catherine goes out and kicks ass and takes out the bad guys. So that was very cathartic. Most of my writing is about trying to get catharsis. And then I have an original pilot that I wrote, an original show, which is sort of a Succession style show set in the weed business in Humboldt County, which is all about, the moral ambiguous lines, which is really where all my writing lives, is in the examination of moral ambiguous lines.
Moral ambiguity is something we could talk.
TV work and, I'm writing my 5th novel now, and I just closed the deal for that. And, promoting a book is a whole other level of work, right? And I just, Convinced came out in August. And so that's, about writing essays and appearing on podcasts and going to, used to be going to bookstores and libraries and conferences, but I did all that virtually, So first of all, I do not have time to be a lawyer anymore. And second, I'm gratefully in recovery, because my experience of being a lawyer on the entertainment side was I did all this work and then everyone else went off and had all the fun.
Right. When so in the summer of 1982, I clerked for Gibson Dunn, a summer intern for Gibson Dunn and Crutcher in Los Angeles, and and I worked on a case involving, and to most people watching this or listening to this, they're going to be much too young to know anything about this, because I was too young at the time to remember this. But whoever played Davy Crockett on TV was really famous, and his estate was suing for residuals. And I had to learn all about residuals as this summer project. And I thought to myself, and I was working with the entertainment lawyers at Gibson Dunn, who I think at the time were really pretty prestigious entertainment lawyers. And I remember, and I'm still in law school, but I remember thinking, entertainment law feels as cutthroat as any corporate law I've been exposed to so far. I mean, just the depositions were as angry as I've ever seen. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing about this business that I have spent, the majority of my adult life in, is that it attracts a lot of the best, a lot of really bright, creative, innovative thinkers, right? It really does. And part of the reason it does is that you can reinvent yourself here. You can go to film school, but you don't need to go to film school, right? Steven Spielberg dropped out, right? I mean, you can. It's not like becoming a doctor or a lawyer where training is required, and so you can reinvent yourself. And frankly, a lot of people who felt out of place where they grew up, a little odd, a little weird, also come to Hollywood, right?
Yes.
So you have a lot of people, with a lot to prove, fragile egos masked by, bluster and braggadocio, you're working in a business that is about creative energy and heart, but it's also, first and foremost a business. And, you have to, this is one of the things that I really love about having become a novelist in the middle of my life, is that, if and some novelists hate me for this, but I have sold every book I have taken to Ballantine. They bought my first one. They have now bought my 5th one, right? In order for me to have a book in the world, I need an editor to say yes, and I need a publisher to say how much, right? That's the only 2 real answers I need. Then I go write a book, and then it is published in the world, right? It's a thing in the world. If I write a movie, right? I could write it on spec, or I could write it as on an assignment, but either way, I have these voices in my ear. my agent, my manager, all who are going to have opinions, the producer, and often their development person, maybe 2 or 3 development people. Then you have whoever you're making it with is financing, providing the money, right? In television, that's usually a 2-tier structure, sometimes a 2-tier structure, both a network and a studio, right? And then you also have to have a director say yes. I'm looking at totally from the writer's perspective. Actors say yes. Someone say this is how much money you have. You have to have so many yeses before that thing you wrote exists in the world. And in fact, things I have produced exist in the world, but nothing I have written as a writer in television, although I have earned a lot of money from doing this, has been made, right? I get paid to write, but my things, then it becomes something that sit on my shelf, right? And I hate that, or, just in a file in my computer. Writing a book is a much more direct way. And the funny thing is that I've sold 3 of my books to television. So now they're being...
Really?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about that.
Just Fall, my first one, I sold to Stars. It didn't get made, but again, I got paid to write a script, so it was another revenue stream, which was cool.
So let me ask you about that, because I'm curious about that part of writing, whether it's for TV, Hollywood, streaming, whatever it is. Unlike a novel, where you and your editor might have clashes, but at the end of the day, it's your voice and it's your words,
Correct.
and you take full responsibility, right?
Yes.
I've written some satirical law pieces in my life. That's just that if I were to read them out loud, would sound one way, but if somebody else were to read them out loud, could sound the opposite of what I am trying to say.
Oh, I see. You mean that the satire might be lost?
Yeah, well, among other things. But in fiction writing, I can't imagine anything more frustrating, even if you get paid, than writing something and having a vision, and then the director, producer, actors spit out what you wrote in ways that you don't like. Like, wouldn't that be incredibly annoying?
Yeah. Well, listen. As an author, have you heard the concept? I'm sure of the death of the author, right?
No, I haven't. Heard that. No, talk to me.
All right.
No.
So what that basically means is that once the book is done, or whatever the writing is done, and it's out in the world, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
It's a live thing for its consumer, but how you intended it. I've had people offended by my book sometimes because. Sometimes, well, frankly,
they're a little racy, Nina. They're a little racy. Let's admit it.
Yes, that's true. Sometimes people are offended, but they're also, political, and and they're getting increasingly political because it's how I process all my fears and theories about the world. So, so why my husband says
you process your theories
write.
about the world through writing.
Fears and furies about the world, yeah.
That's what we do all the time.
It's all, for me, it is all catharsis. It is all how I stay sane, or relatively sane, right?
Right.
I actually just published a piece in Crime Reads called "Why Writing About Psychopaths Keeps Me Sane."
I saw that, and I was going to ask you. But before I promise to return to psychopaths, because I've known one in my life, and it was the scariest thing in my existence. Who's now a really famous person, so it's very scary. But anyway, I can't tell that story. But anyway, do writers? So let's take a hypothetical. I'm a law professor. A hypothetical established writer who's had success, in Hollywood, who's had 2 or 3 movies and they've been successful. And so Hollywoods are like, oh, if that person's willing to write the movie, we're interested, maybe. Do they have any clout normally once the movie is being made to come in and say, wait a minute, you're saying that line that way, but the way you're saying it completely changes what I was trying to say?
Does the writer have any clout? In a movie, no.
None.
In TV, complete clout.
Okay.
This is why I'm only working in television.
Right. And how about Netflix and stream? Where is the streaming? Is that in between? Is that in TV? What is the streaming?
Well, it depends on how it's structured, honestly. I don't know exactly why it's developed this way, but I think a lot of it comes out of sort of the auteur theories of the 70s and French filmmaking. But in film, the director is considered the ultimate creative voice, right?
Right.
So, and writers are often considered fungible. There's often
Yes.
14 different people on a project.
I've never understood that, but yes.
Yeah, no, I didn't understand it when I was producing. I always tried to protect the original. You're protecting a voice, right? You're not like, and it becomes increasingly muddled the more you try to have different, people smash in there.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that, so in film, the director is king. A writer is frequently not even on set. It depends. There are writers who may have, more clout or have a relationship with the director, but frequently they're not on set. Frequently, there used to be joke that they wouldn't be invited to the premiere. Like, writers are in film or, unless you're, of real eminence, kind of sideline. In TV, it's completely different. The director comes in as a rotation player. It does not, when you think about what the role is, right, it's building character, building the physical environment, picking locations. All of that is done before the director shows up on set for most television. And so they are a functionary. They're figuring out where to, point the camera with existing characters and dynamics and pieces of the story already set up. They're just a cog in a wheel. And so it's interesting. It makes it much. I mean, it's a hard job in television because you're both a money and physical production and creative all at once.
I heard I forget who it was, but some very famous actor. For some reason, I think he was talking to Seinfeld on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. But I heard some famous actor somewhere say the reason that he was really excited about the streaming services and was spending most of his time there was you can tell a story over a long period of time without it having to be so formulaic and all. But can I tell you what hit me when he said that? And I know nothing about the history of movies other than what I watch. But I do know that in the 30s, I think, or maybe the 40s, serials were a thing where you went to a movie theater and you didn't see the end. You had to come back to see the end. Right? And I think we've gone full circle to that because I think now to watch something good on Netflix takes 14 different hours, and and I'm wondering if you think there's a nice connection there.
Well, I think that there's you have to ask yourself as a creator, right? How will this story best be told? Some things might be best told, like Convince Me, my new book, which we're now just exploring as a potential adaptation, right? I don't think that's a series. I think that's a one shot. It's a contained story. It has its revelations. I don't see that there's a plot engine in that could keep it going in a serialized basis. Where the Burial Society books, by the very nature of what they are, a woman who has cases saving different people, can lend itself to episodic television.
Right.
Then some things, might lend themselves to webisode telling, right? Or there are stories that are best told in increments of 5 minutes, right? So I think you have to really think about what is it I'm trying to say and what is the best way to express that, and from the organic storytelling place, and then figure out where it fits in the film's universe.
It's funny the way you said that. My wife teaches problem solving, team building, and communication at Emory Business School, and it's a very on the ground course, and communication especially, and I think what she thinks, and I think I agree with this with my own legal writing, is the structure comes first almost. I mean, not first. I mean, the idea comes first, but if you're trying to convince a CEO of something, you've got to figure out the right question, how to structure it, how to present it, all in a way that fits the environment that you're in. And I guess I feel like what you're doing is the same thing, kind of.
It totally is. I mean, if you look at one of my videos, one of them is what is writing? And the answer that I say to that is a series of answers to questions posed.
Yeah.
You're the writer posing questions. And then you're answering them saying character and craft, right? And so that's sort of what, that's a reductive way of looking at it, but that's what we have in our toolkit. I always ask myself first, well, what am I writing about, right? And then if it's fiction, who are the best characters for me to create to explore those themes, right? And then, for example, in my new book, one of the things I'm exploring is, collective grief and individual grief, and how much can we bear, right? And so I have a character who is a therapist, because that allows me to have patients coming into her all the time with their tales of what's going on in their lives, their injuries, their grievances, their pains, in a way that's not about does move the story along, but it's also about a way for me to explore that theme. And so that was choice of character, to choose theme. And then I think that, then you just ask yourself questions. This is why I don't believe in writer's block. I think if you feel blocked, you just haven't asked yourself the right questions yet. What are the questions you're trying to solve? What are you trying to get your reader to think about? What is the conclusion you're trying to get them to reach? Or in the case of fiction, what is the misdirection you want them to accept? Or you turn it around on them again.
Writer's block is interesting. Now that I write almost a blog post a week, which I do, plus my books and articles and all that stuff, writer's block hits me sometimes. And when it does, sometimes it just does, and take a couple of days off. But other times, there's a song by Stephen Sondheim from Sunday in the Park with George called "Move On."
Oh, I love that play.
Yeah, "Move On," and Bernard, and I think it is a fantastic ode to when you're out of ideas. What do? You move on. You don't look,
sometimes if I'm stuck, I'll say, all right, I'm going to go write that scene that I know is coming later. Because I'll just get there, or I'll sketch something out, or I'll find another. I do believe that good writing involves both vertical and lateral thinking. And vertical thinking is all the things you can learn. It's structure and craft and logic and tropes, frankly, and stereotypes and all the things that you can lean into, right? And then the horizontal thinking is all that loosey-goosey sort of connectivity to the universe where, and this happens to me where I'm writing and all of a sudden stuff is coming out and I have no idea where it's coming from, and it's almost like I'm channeling, and the book is going in a different direction than I necessarily thought. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's where it's going. And I think that comes from just, letting go of structure. And you need both, right? You need, if you don't have enough vertical thinking, you're going to be self-indulgent and vague. And if you don't have enough, horizontal thinking, you're not going to be original, right? So you have to really find a balance.
I'm going to ask you about the psychopath in a minute, and it's relevant this way. So I'm writing a long book review now of a book on originalism, and a lot of the book is making me so mad. It just makes me so mad. And I'm actually finding, and that doesn't happen very often in what I do, and I'm finding the anger is actually helping me channel some stuff. Like I'm writing, I almost never write angry. I write puzzled, I don't write angry. But I'm writing this angry. Like I'm so mad at this person. So you were saying that writing is the way you channel your energies these days. I'm assuming Trump is a part of that. I'm assuming.
So I'll tell you the anecdote about writing convinced me. So I was triggered, not in like the psychological sense, but the trigger for the book was reading a particular article about an example of a pathological liar, unrepentant, and his white male privilege, and how he was not going to be at all affected, right? There was one article that, and I'm not going to name names again, but there was one article that I read that said, these are all the horrible things he's done. Right. And then there was an article the next day, a follow-up, what's going to happen to him? And the answer was absolutely nothing. He was making people money. He hadn't broken any technical laws, right? And it was like for some reason, this was the last straw for me. And the entire plot for the book came into my head, literally like an arrow in my forehead. And for the next 4.5 months, I felt pulling it out inch by inch into the computer. And normally I'm kind of a mule when I write. I set my hours, I sit down for my hours, I work, whether the work is good or bad, but this, I was waking up in the middle of the night to write. I was jotting things down, in the middle of doing other things. I was just absolutely crazy. And the entire book came into my head, including the final twist. Like I just knew it. This has never happened to me before. And it was so cathartic to write it. It was just unbelievably cathartic. And spoiler that my I created a character of a pathological liar, unrepentant, and I kill him before the book begins. The book starts at his funeral. That's why it's not a spoiler. But I have to tell you that was the most cathartic thing I did. The book is. Can I curse on this podcast?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the book dedication says this book is for everyone who's sick and tired of the fucking liars and their fucking lies. And it's funny. That's what it was. It was me saying I'm so mad, and so I didn't want this pathological liar to have the ability to defend himself or deflect from his crimes in the way that he had done in real life, when he was alive. Not that he was real, but the way he had done before I killed him. And so it was immensely satisfying. Like I sat down to write that book, and I knew he was dead, and it just made me feel so happy. And the funny thing is that dedication on the Kindle version of the book is on the very last page instead of the front piece of the book. And one thing that keeps happening is that people are leaving reviews on Amazon or whatever, and they're saying, and I got to that dedication, and I knew that she wrote the book for me.
Well, that's great. Isn't that?
So I feel like it's resonating.
Yeah, I can't imagine a better compliment.
Yeah, exactly.
We are heading towards the end of time. So, and this has been unbelievable. I've really enjoyed this. So, but I do want to. Fun. I would be remiss if I did not discuss how we met. And part of this is because at one of my episodes I talked a lot about parenting, and I think a lot of parents. I know your kids are older, but a lot of parents are struggling right now. Obviously. During this.
I'm struggling right now. I have one kid who's in the path of the Portland wildfires, and another kid who's just had his third hurricane warning in New Orleans. So I'm like, so, I am, struggling like every other parent.
So you and I met in the summer of 1971.
Good Lord.
In Poughkeepsie, New York, at a summer camp. And we had a 7th grade thing by 7th grade standards.
I know you were my first kiss.
You were mine. Turns out.
All right, secrets out, everybody.
I'm not sure how I'm going to put that on Twitter, but I think I'm going to. I've learned that a good tweet is worth 1,000 words. My blog posts get read only by how well I can tweet them out, not what the blog posts actually say.
All right, that's
but anyway, but when you and I went to camp, and we were privileged, and this, not everybody gets to go to summer camp. Yeah. But in New York in 1971, and I think still today, kids went for 2 months. Like we were gone for I think 9 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks. These days, I don't think. I mean, my kids go to summer camp, sleepaway camp, and they don't let them take cell phones or anything. But they go in the South for 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. 8 weeks is not a thing down here, really.
Right.
I think with cell phones and the internet and stuff that we didn't have, obviously, I think being away from my parents, who I loved, that summer was such a cathartic, wonderful thing for me, and you were part of that. I kind of think our kids don't get that today, and that's bad. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I loved camp. I had all my firsts at camp, and I'll leave it there. Yeah. But I also just I love that sense of freedom. I think the first summer I went, I was 8, and I cried half the summer, but I couldn't wait after that. I couldn't wait to go back. And I did things at camp that I never would have done. I had a little farming plot. I learned how to, make silver jewelry. I mean, I just did things that, were very, as you say, very privileged. But I think also very good for me. I remember spending one summer pinning bugs to a board. Like, I grew up in New York City.
No, we camped out,
trees.
You and I. We camped out in the woods. It might have been the last time I've camped out, right? Except for one time.
I can't say that. I have camped out since. But I was such a city kid, which was partly why my parents began sending me to camp, because I was afraid of grass, and I just was uncomfortable in concrete, and they were like, get this girl into some fresh air. But I loved it. My daughter didn't end up going to camp. My son did. I think it was great for him, and I think it really does build skills of self-sufficiency, and and I also loved my parents. It wasn't about wanting to get away.
Right.
It was just a really special time to develop self-reliance, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and there's a friend of mine, Pete Dominic, who had a radio show on XM for 15 years, and now does podcasts, and he and I have talked. I have 3 daughters. He has 2. We've talked a lot about helicopter parenting, but the cliche is not what we mean. There is something liberating about knowing that absent emergency, you really can't reach your parents, and that's not true. And that's not true anymore. That doesn't. Really...
And I think it's actually good for parents to also realize you can't reach your kids.
Yes,
my father, who is brilliant man and achieved a lot in his life. But one of the smartest things he ever said to me was, the hardest part of parenting is letting go. And, that's proven absolutely true.
Agree 100%. 100%.
Going from these beings who are completely dependent on you to recognizing that, they're out there in the world. I honestly feel like it's like having a piece of your heart unprotected by bone and sinew and muscle and skin, just out there wandering the universe, completely vulnerable. It's the most terrible thing, this parenting business. Yeah. Love them so much, it's terrible.
It is, and we have to let them go. My friend got in trouble on the radio when he told a story about his 10-year. I think she was 10 at the time, maybe 11. He let her walk the neighborhood. He lives 45 minutes from New York City in one of the, not White Plains, but someplace up there. And people thought he was crazy, let his 10-year-old daughter or 10-and-a-half-year-old daughter walk 5 blocks to wherever she was going. And he said she's a much better chance of dying in the shower, of slipping in the shower. Statistically, she has a much better chance of slipping in the shower than she does of getting kidnapped. And that spirals out. So I don't know if you remember this. I'm not a religious person at all, but I have some. I don't know. I do believe in some kind of karma. I can't figure it out exactly, but not the 7th grade year that you and I spent together, but 2 years before that. You actually went out with my best friend at that same camp, a guy named Michael Smolin. I didn't think you'd remember this. A guy named Michael Smolin. You were probably 11 or 10 or something. But what I remember about
what a hussy I was at 10 going out with boys.
This is going to amaze you. He was obsessed with movies. Obsessed.
Oh, really?
Yes. He talked about horror movies all the time.
Oh, funny.
The
one genre I don't like.
But. Yeah. and well,
the relationship didn't last.
Yeah. But I thought when I saw you on the internet, I don't know, somehow I saw your name somewhere a few years ago, and I saw you were in movies with Meg Ryan and all that stuff. And I thought, wow, she knew what she wanted at 10.
I actually didn't. I mean, I really didn't discover movies till I worked at Astoria Studios. I really was all about live theater and dance. Yeah. And then when I left the Schubert organization, I got a job at Astoria Studios. And this is honestly what happened. I got completely romanced. I began to wander onto sets and just ask people, what do you do? What's that called? Wow. I got a little glimpse behind the curtain. And then there were a couple of movies that I saw that really impacted me. And this I'll never forget is that the bar scene in the first Star Wars movie, the cantina.
Yeah, a lot of people say that.
That really transported me in a way. And then I had been a reader, and a live theater person. I was kind of snobby about filmed entertainment. I don't know why. I don't know why, but because I just loved, I think, performing. I performed a lot as a kid, and I just loved that so much. But once I got hooked on it and began to see, how complex it was, and then I also realized that I could really merge my creative skills, my legal background and training, and the business sense, right? I could make all of that work together. And I am a creative producer when I produce. Now I'm really focusing on the writing. I think it's my strength. I only really want to produce my own stuff. I'm not producing other people's things right now. But it took me a while to find my way back to what I felt was my real identity, which was this creative person. Right. I think partly because there was a lot of fear that could you earn a living as a creative, right? Certainly, that's
I'm
why
sure that
my
fear
parents pushed me to go to law school.
I'm sure that fear runs throughout Hollywood at every level.
Yeah. And listen, it is not easy. I have had some really good years and I have had some really terrible years.
Yeah.
And, you have to, I think a lot of people just give up on Hollywood because they either don't have the financial wherewithal to keep going, which I totally get, or the psychological stamina just to keep going in the face of, 99% rejection. I mean, that's the truth of it. So, you have to really figure it out if you want to go the distance.
Yeah, that's how I always kind of imagined it. I think when your business is creating illusion, that's going to run deep. Anyway, Nina, this has been wonderful.
It's been really fun. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great chat, and
I've learned a lot, and it was good to reconnect. And I want to see your stuff on TV soon. I'm sure I will.
All right, great. And if I can just give a plug, if you want to read my Cheerfully Dark Dispatches,
Yep.
You can go to my website, ninasadowsky.com, and sign up. And I'm also just sponsoring a short story contest.
I saw that. Excellent.
On the subject of liars and lies, 500 words, submit through the website. The winner will be published through the Dispatch, which reaches about 8,000 people.
Great.
And we'll also get some swag in the mail from me.
Well, I think when you say cheerfully dark is the only way one can be in Trump's America, but we're going to leave it at that.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Dark and resolutely resilient.
Yes. Thanks so much. It was great to see you.
All right. Great.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.